All right, we're gonna kick this off. Well, first of all, just really appreciative of how many of y'all turned out today, and welcome if you're new to this activity in TxDOT. And I was appreciative of our task force members being here with us to bring together topics that are of interest to the state and to Department of Transportation, whether directly impact our mission or it's about mobility and its future in the state, and what are the considerations that we may need to have regarding that. So a few things going on in the state. I'm kind of giving the state of TxDOT information, at least for the innovation side of it. Major transportation investment in the state, just like at the federal level. Governor Abbott announced a record 10-year, $100 billion transportation plan that will increase, obviously, the number of projects and to improve congestion and maintenance across the state. And we look to have a number of technology efforts related to that as well. So very excited about and very fortunate as a state to have that kind of capacity, and certainly mindful of that within the department, that we got to make the most of all those dollars that we have. There's several bills. Our legislature, like many of the states, is in session. If you're not familiar with Texas, it's every 2 years here, and they are pretty good about getting it done and getting out if they can. And that's, again, the goal of this session is pass the bills they need to and move back to their regular lives. A number of bills relative to what we do or talk about in the task force, they range from electrification to data privacy to connected and autonomous vehicle legislation and advanced air mobility topics. Electrification, the bills are spread between things dealing with registration fees to examining the impacts of electrification overall in the state, potential ideas of an electrification council, and we'll just see which ones go through. The registration fees were bills last session that didn't make it through. They seem to have more emphasis and interest this session to account for the growth of electric vehicles in the state and the impact on the gas tax in the future. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't see something along those lines pass in this session to at least set the initial conditions for how do we make that transition to an electrified or semi-electrified vehicle market. Data privacy and cybersecurity have been an emphasis point in the state probably for the last 3 or 4 sessions, and continue to be that way in this session. There's a effort to have a data privacy officer at our Directorate of Information Resources. I would expect that probably to happen. I mean, that's kind of an obvious one. But a number of other cybersecurity and data privacy related elements and bills, and we'll just have to track which ones make it through both houses and actually make it through the governor's desk. But it's almost a fun process for me to watch sometimes, just to see it. I mean, this is the most bills filed in, I believe, in history. Ginger probably knows, but I heard it's over 8,000 bills filed this session, which is a pretty large number of bills, and it's been really fun trying to read through all the ones that come through and see which ones apply to us. Autonomous vehicle, we passed our major autonomous vehicle law back in 2017, and each session there's been onesie-twosie ones that attempt to refine on that or address an area that wasn't considered previously. This one, there is a bill, and it's similar to ones that have been proposed in many states about AV freight and keeping a driver in the cab, even though it's fully autonomous. And we'll be interested to see if that gets legs and what the implications of that may be. And then advanced air mobility, there's a bill right now seeking to have TxDOT continue a similar task force as to what it was charged to do last session, to again look at the state's current laws and what laws might be at the federal level or might be implemented in the state to facilitate the advancement of drones, both for passenger and package delivery services. I don't think there are a few other laws on, typical ones you might see about restrictions of overflights over prisons and things like that. So we'll see which of those and how far they get. I think I mentioned last time that we formally established a cooperative and automated transportation program within the department. We have a strategy document. We have a program plan to support that strategy. And within one of my divisions in strategic planning divisions, we have a team now that's dedicated to managing that program and the portfolio of projects that will generate. Doesn't mean they'll be the executors. They'll coordinate with the districts that are responsible for those given locations, as well as the divisions that have inherent responsibilities related to it to deliver on that strategy. But it's a key step forward. It's not something, and we're a little late to the game compared to some other states. I know that, but it took a long, arduous discussion about what do we really want to do and why do we want to do this. And I recognize that both connected and automated technologies have had, rapid progression and then some setbacks. And so that's part of what's caused us to pause and think about what do we want to achieve. And regardless of where those capabilities end up, I believe there will be capabilities of some sort that are long lasting in the state. And that's what we're trying to focus on, is how do we best facilitate those, as well as do our part to make sure that they're safe and serving the public in a way that we all want to accomplish it. Continue to work in the task force, as well as we have the Texas Innovation Alliance effort, which is focused on a number of city and regional team partners with TxDOT that are focused on local deployments of advanced technologies in support of community needs. And we also have our statewide Transportation Innovation Council, Federal Highways Everyday Counts program. And we continue to work to bring the activities of all three of those, including this one, efforts together in a more seamless way to complement each other, but also so leadership understands why do we have three to start with? What are the differences between them? And then also what are we doing with all three groups and how are we moving forward in the state? So we're making progress on that. We had combination meetings back during, what was it, a forum? Is that right? When was the last one? Forum? And I think we're going to have some more complimentary ones here in the summer. Erica Kemp is the new Strategic Planning Division Director. She's not here with me today because she's covering another all-day meeting I'm supposed to be in. But very happy to have her on the team, and please know that she's another person you can reach out to if you have questions about that division and all of its emerging technology efforts and where we're going in the division. Some of the priorities for the division, other than those I just mentioned, are we have a statewide data contract that we established with 3 different companies and a team. That's an outgrowth of a previous one that we had. And it's not going to stop there. And when I say statewide, the intent is that we are able to bring any public entity in the state underneath and use that contract mechanism to get that data as well and use that. And the goal with another effort that we're doing with TTI is we're looking at other big data sources out there and thinking about, is it valid? Is it useful? And then what are the use cases for that data in the state? If it's outside of what we're gaining from the current contract, with the intent that we will continue to develop, grow if needed, and modify our data needs in the state. And tied to that, we're working on a data strategy with our IT division and strategic planning division to kind of encompass where does TxDOT want to go the next 10 to 15 years as it relates to use of data and how it will be effective in the department. She's also working on, let's call them innovative corridors, starting with I-45. Mark Williams, the executive director, has a focus on wanting us to define at a base level what an innovative corridor would be, and then what else could we add. And it might be a little bit different depending upon which corridor we're talking about. But that's an effort that's underway. And I don't think it'll stop. And I think at the same time we're working on I-45, we will be working on several other corridors kind of in concert with it, but that will be the focus area to deploy first. And we've actually even put some placeholders in the UTP the Unified Transportation Program, which is our program of projects or road projects. We put some placeholders in that to allow for those projects to happen in the coming year. So right now we're in the planning year, the development year, and then looking to do some deployment on 45 in 2024, 25 timeframe. And finally, am I good on time, by the way? Okay. The traffic management centers, the other related effort to what I've been talking about is, what does the traffic management center need to look like in the future? What does automation mean as it relates to traffic management? What does connectivity mean as it relates to traffic management? What does all this data that we're chasing after mean in relation to that? How does it change the way a traffic management center functionally operates? Does it change the way where they actually work? I mean, is it more distributed? Is it still really localized? And then what are all the capabilities and tools that they may need to effectively work within a greater environment than what they do now? So thinking through that and what that may mean. I think I hit all the big ones. Before I go further, I also want to introduce Lauren Frericks, is another new member of the team. Were you here at the last one? Okay, she was here at the last one, just to make sure. But she's key to pulling together the task force meetings along with our Center for Transportation Research partners, Christy, Mark, Andrea, and you're not. But they'll be talking to you here in a moment. And so just turning to the agenda itself and looking forward to today's agenda, we try to pick topics that are relevant both to TxDOT and to all our partners and try to vary them up and think about them in several months in advance. So hopefully this is fresh and new for you. AV industry obviously continues to evolve. There's been a lot of news about successes, with a lot of news about companies folding. I think there's a lot of niche areas that are continuing to be addressed by the companies in Texas, and we're very, very glad that many companies have chosen Texas to do their testing and deployments across the spectrum of different types of platforms. And it gives us an opportunity to learn how those might change mobility in the future or goods delivery. And we think we're good partners with them through our CAB task force and a number of other measures. And then also the resilience topic and preparedness for weather. Obviously, we're big players in weather events, but there are all other aspects related to resiliency and weather issues that have tangential relationships to our emergency services mission that are very important and very interesting to us as it relates to what else might we need to know or work on in the future. So happy to have that panel here this afternoon as well to help us think through that. With that, let me take roll, or you want to do it?
Let's do round robin introduction.
Let's just do a quick round robin. Just who are you and what company or organization you represent, and we'll start with Michael.
Michael Morris, North Central Texas Council Grove. It's the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Dallas-Fort Worth.
Josh Johnson from Southwest Research Institute. I'm stepping in for Steve Dellenbach, who's also online.
I'm Kurt Stein, president of Steigl Executive Group, previously Center for Automotive Research and the Michigan DOT.
Andrea Gold, UT-CTR.
I'm Betsy Hilliard. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Valkyrie. I'll be speaking this afternoon.
Mark Werner, also at UT Austin Center for Transportation Research.
Lauren Ferris with TxDOT.
Christy Chen, UT Austin, CTR.
Justin Levy, CTR.
Molly Hindrocker, CTR.
Ken Owens, TxDOT. Ginger Good, Blue Door Strategy and Research.
Rob Carey with Deloitte.
Paul Graver from SAS Institute.
Nolan Gentry with Accenture.
Meg Hare with Accenture. Suzanne Whittington, La Valley.
Colin Mayfeld from WeJo.
Yubi Murira from UT-CTR.
Kayla Sample, also CTR.
Ben McCullough, TxDOT.
Yadier Diaz, Cruz.
Carl Starr, Cruz.
Kelly Kidlin, TxDOT. Monica Alman, TxDOT.
Sean Moodhart, UT-CTR.
Daniel Wong, Cambridge Systematics.
Chris Kiefer and GTV. I think the Econ.
Alex Vasquez, TxDOT.
Anna McCauley, CTR.
Adam Kalashevsky, CAFNU.
John Esparza, Texas Trucking Association.
Mark Tatum with Texas PPS.
Rob Ballerini.
Miles Matthews, Strategic Partnerships.
Tracy Porter, App Engineering.
Jennifer Holmes, Accenture. Christine Bush.
Steve Rainey with TxDOT. Kevin Peak with Research Vision, TxDOT.
Shelley Pridgeon, also with Research Division, TxDOT.
Hunter Maples, TTIF.
Yeah. You said.
Will Van Overbeck, TxDOT.
Sorry, I laughed at Adam. He just threw me because former TxDOT. You threw me off for a second. All right, Andy, it's yours.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I want to give a quick introduction. So if you haven't been with the task force before, just kind of a quick explainer of the activities and the people that are involved, and then we're going to get into a presentation right after. So the way that we organize our activities, we like to say people, portfolio, and plan. So by people, we mean the task force members themselves. And we forgot to mention it looks like 25 people online now. So you'll see some of the members are attending virtually, and then we've got a mix of other people. So the people are the task force members. It's Darren and his team in strategic planning at TxDOT. It's other divisions within TxDOT that we work closely with. Our team, CTR at UT Austin. And then what we do is we try to build out a network of experts who work on different technology deployment topics. Bring them into the fold. We like to run panels, deep dives, Q&A sessions with the purpose of trying to dig deep into different technologies, pull out some of the best practices, the lessons learned, and then offer up recommendations for TxDOT and other agencies who are interested in advancing the technology in one way or another. So that's the people. The portfolio, it's the list of technologies. Usually we have a graphic. I think we've got one in the slide deck coming up. But it's that list of technologies that we like to track. When we started out, it was focused on maybe a handful of technologies from connected and automated vehicles, electric vehicles, and a few other things. That's grown. It's about 30 plus different technologies now. It includes big data, 3D printing, drones and UAS, and a number of other things. That's the portfolio. And then the plans. We've got two main things. One is the technology utilization plan, which I'll present on in just a moment. And then we also we develop a series of white papers each year. Those include different case studies with either folks that are deploying in Texas or outside of Texas. It captures lessons learned, and it offers up some strategies for implementation, research, or policy development around different technologies. So that's people, portfolio, and plan. Kind of a brief intro to the task force. I'm happy to answer questions later in the break if you all have any questions about what we do. And then we're going to get into the program for today. So we'll kick off in just a moment with the technology utilization plan. We are a couple months into a major kind of retooling of the plan, which we do every 2 years. And then kind of in the in-between years, we just update it. And then we're going to have a panel, as Darren mentioned, on looking at the market for autonomous vehicles. We'll look at extreme weather response and different technologies for that. And then we'll close out with a presentation on artificial intelligence and big data. And so with that, something we wanted to circle back to. We're going to talk about this a little bit at the end, but our team, we also work with the Texas Innovation Alliance, which focuses not only on the state level activities, but the local and regional agencies. And we're going to have a convening of the Alliance in July. We're bringing together teams from different metro areas. We're going to talk about innovation zones, and corridors, and we're going to have more details coming forward through that. So we'll come back later at the closeout and talk about this. Okay, so to get into the technology utilization plan, this is something that we're developing currently. We work with TxDOT and the task force members to come up with recommendations on how to move forward with different technologies. So we start with the portfolio. That's that list of technologies that I mentioned. We take those and we ask the task force members, I believe it was at the end of last year, what are the priority technologies that we really need to do deep dives on? So those are connected and automated vehicles, electric vehicles, big data, mobility as a service, which is kind of a bigger bucket for micromobility, transit, and it was also drones or UAS. So once we have the priority technologies, we move into an assessment phase. And that assessment phase looks at how well some of the different technologies align with different goals. What are some of the barriers to implementation? And then we're looking at the maturity. So we've been talking about this for quite some time now in the task force, number of years for the different technologies. It seems like a lot of technologies are only a couple of years away. So we're really trying to figure out, what are some of the timelines for the technologies? What's the true maturity of them? And with that, we reach out to different industry expert task force members to get input and try to figure out kind of where those line up on the goals and the barriers. And from there, we form a composite score. We've got a scale, I believe, from 0 to 5 that indicates how ready technologies may be for adoption or implementation. And then the final part, which we'll be moving into here in the next month or so, is we'll be reaching out to the task force members and folks within TxDOT to craft our recommendations and put those forward. So that's when we formally come out with kind of our thoughts on what we should do after a year of looking at the different technologies. Go to the next slide. So our approach this year, if you've been with us before, you've seen that we have a matrix assessment that we have done. And it gets kind of messy and hard to do. So we tried to retool this year and simplify our assessment. So we took the technologies, broke them down into some of their different components. So for autonomous vehicles, for example, some of the radar, cameras, LiDAR, AI computing, and we're mapping those to the technology readiness levels. This is something that we have seen used in TxDOT's research division before. So we wanted to keep consistent with an approach they already have, and we're trying to understand which components are more mature or less mature. And then looking at going to the next slide, looking at the use cases, and not just the technology, but how do you apply them? What is the market maturity for some of the use cases? Many of y'all have probably seen the Gartner hype cycle before. I know we're going to talk about it again in just a few moments, but we're trying to understand how far along some of the different use cases are relative to one another. We have seen a lot of excitement and some early adoption, and we've seen things slow down and maybe come back out of that slowdown and back up again. But we're going to try to map some different priority use cases for each of the technologies and try to tell the story of what the adoption might look like at different timeframes for that short, mid, and long range. So this just gives an example of what a scenario might look like. And we'll come back to what the use cases are. So this is a snapshot of what the ultimate output will look like for the goals and barriers assessment. So we took a look at USDOT goals, TxDOT goals, and mashed those together. And then we've had our research team, which is sitting over here, look into how well autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, whichever technology it lines up with enabling economic competitiveness for the state, improving congestion, improving safety, improving maintenance and operations, improving workforce development, accessibility, sustainability, and resilience and connectivity. Then on the flip side, we're doing deep dives to try to understand what are the barriers, because we've got 4 buckets: institutional, academic, industry, and public awareness. Looking at federal and state policies, or those barriers or those enabling the technology to roll out. Looking at the research there to support that the use cases have been vetted as validated and ready to go. Looking at there are a number of industry deployments that we can learn from. Are the technologies able to scale? Do we have the workforce in place to support the technology? And then on the public side, are they aware? What is the public perception of the technology? What are concerns? And then cost. So we'll refine these as kind of our first pass at that assessment. We're going to work with the task force and TxDOT to kind of get those to the final. And we're doing the same with the technology readiness levels. We've pulled out the components, and we'll be coming back to the experts and ask them, do we have this right? There's 9 different levels. Do we have each component placed in the correct place? And then finally, on the use case identification, you see for the different technologies, there are a number of use cases. So we've asked TxDOT to help us prioritize a handful, maybe 3 for each technology, that they want to understand what does that trajectory look like potentially. What are those scenarios that we want to tell a story around? So we'll be finalizing those and moving forward. And then for the task force members, we've got homework for y'all. We're going to be reaching out in the next month. We're going to ask either yourself or somebody within your agency who is an expert on a technology area to help us review the work we've put together. The TRLs, the hype cycle, do we have those placements correct? We provide feedback, and then we'll craft the scenarios moving forward. So that's finalizing the technology, and then the final recommendations. The overall, we're going to reach back out to y'all. We'll have a workshop and craft those for the end. So this is a timeline. So we'll be working kind of virtual work sessions from here until the end of May, and then the hope is to come back to y'all in June at our next meeting and present the recommendations and the findings. The last one. All right. if there's any questions. We're going to keep talking about this at each of the meetings, but if you have questions now, myself and the team are happy to answer.
Was that last slide, the previous slide, their assignments?
Yes.
What are you looking at me for?
Smiling.
I think in transit, it's been a really great transition with regard to mobility as a service. You've seen the technology starting 10 years ago, then the development of the phrase mobility as a service, huge increases in transit ridership in that whole technology-based element, maybe a key of helping transit agencies across the country come out of COVID. The thought I'd like to leave with you is mobility as a service for freeways. So I'd like us to start thinking about the active management of our freeway system, the notion of the digital twin that we've talked about before. We're having conversations with TxDOT with regard to 511 going statewide. The safety task force is looking at additional mobility assistance controls to help on the safety side. We're implementing a new technology implementation corridor on US 75 with regard to turning the traffic signals green automatically to increase the reliability of the frontage roads to get around an incident or an accident or construction. So I think there's some low-hanging fruit. TxDOT likes to build a freeway and check the quality of the bridges at regular intervals, but not necessarily manage it. You know what I mean? It's a capital intensive industry where operational elements other than maintenance are really the focus. So this isn't an idea for every corridor, but I think for selected corridors, this notion of freeway mobility as a service, it'd be interesting to take sort of the history of the transit mobility as a service and then start looking at what would the parameters of freeways be. I think Darren, you did a good job articulating these corridors that may be good corridors for technology. Sometimes technology maybe is the answer. Sometimes it's maybe active management of the corridor, whatever that may mean. So there may be some low-hanging fruit with regard to freeway mobility as a service. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll come back to that when we talk about recommendations. And then looking at two of our writers over here for the white papers. We've got one on innovation corridors. They're trying to compile some of the novel ideas and best practices and put forth recommendations there. And then we've got one on data, looking at novel applications for big data and traffic management. So y'all can talk with my voice later.
And on that, I mentioned tech because I was on a tech-minded run there, but the discussion about the innovative corridor was well beyond. It was like, what makes a corridor innovative? Is it, freight parking can be a part of that. Is it the greater environment of data capabilities around it? Is it different types of active management on that corridor? So yeah, I welcome that.
Any other questions or comments? Maybe it might be just a few minutes ahead. All right, well, we'll turn it over to Ginger.
So Andrea, you get lunch, apparently, if you're a few minutes ahead. It seems like if you're behind, you don't get lunch, but if you're on
Well, we'll
schedule,
see how we do with this panel.
Christy said it's okay to have food.
And then we got word that one of our panelists, he's sick today. So Jeremiah won't be with us, but I think hopefully that message got to Ginger. So Ginger, we've worked with you a number of different forums in the past. We're glad that we can work with you in the task force. And I think this is your first time speaking, right? At the task force.
I think so. It's not just going to be me to join me.
Yeah.
Jeremiah is the one who's sick, right?
Yeah, Parker.
He just stepped out.
Okay, so he'll be back.
You started early.
I think we can have it.
Not yet.
Watch Carter when he walks in. He's walking down.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Ginger Gooden. I am a partner in a new Texas-based company called Blue Door Strategy and Research, formerly with TTI. But our company does research-based consulting in innovation, planning, policy. So it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to moderate. So our panel today, the idea is that we're going to give an inside market perspective on the state of the technology. And hopefully these panels will provide their thoughts on how to position Texas for success. We intend to offer a reality check. I think that's what the task force was looking for. And with some frank conversation about the market outlook and capabilities. I want to start by, I don't know if you have the slide. We've already been talking about the hype cycle, but I wanted to put this up again and just kind of dive into it a little bit. We lost.
Disconnected.
Anyway, this is an illustration that I think has, over the years, it's helped me kind of understand the different phases of technology development. And so I kind of want to walk through this as to set some context for the panel. So what you see on this on the bottom, this is actually the 2022 Gartner Artificial Intelligence Hype Cycle. And you'll see on the bottom, there are first, and I can't see it, so I'm going to use my notes here. The innovation trigger, which is the technology breakthrough, and we start to see a lot of publicity about the technology. The peak of inflated expectations, which is exactly how it's described. That's where you have some success, but you're also starting to see some failures. Then it goes down into the trough of disillusionment where the interest wanes. And there's really a lot of market shakeout. The slope of enlightenment is where you start to see the benefits and the business models crystallize. And then the plateau of productivity is where the technology is mainstream and scale. Also, what Gartner does is that it indicates in their estimation how far it will take before the technology reaches the plateau of productivity. And so I went back into presentations that I've done over the last 10 years on this topic, and where I've used the hype cycle. And in 2015, autonomous vehicles, as they described it, was at the peak of inflated expectations with a market outlook of 5 years. That would have been 2020. In 2018, it was heading down into the trough of disillusionment, but with a market outlook at that point of 10 years or more. And so what we see today on here is that it's kind of coming out of the trough now, according to Gartner, with a 10-year outlook. So with that kind of context, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. And what I'm going to do is ask them to, after I go through and introduce each one, they're each going to give a little bit of an overview from their perspective and their ideas on the future outlook, as well as a little bit of an introduction for each one. So we have Rob Carey here right next to me. He is with Deloitte. He is executive transportation leader there. We have Carter Stern, who is director of global government affairs at Cruise, and Mark Solano, who is the city policy and engagement manager at Neuro. So I've asked Rob to go first.
Sure, and great to be here with you all today. As was said, I'm a specialist executive with Deloitte. I work really all across North America. Do some work in Canada as well, so I'm bi-national. But before joining Deloitte about 1.5 years ago, I spent 30 years with the Virginia Department of Transportation. I was the chief deputy commissioner there for the last 4 years, appointed by the governor to that role. Basically the chief operating officer of the agency, the third largest state maintained highway system in the country after Texas and North Carolina. And in that, my whole career covered everything from design to construction to operations, maintenance, snow removal, P3s, you name it, I touched it at some point. And one of the things that I did there before being appointed as chief deputy commissioner is I was the agency's chief of innovation. A role I think kind of similar to Darren's role here, where I had all the connected vehicle work, all the autonomous vehicle work, the pilots with shuttles and so forth that we're doing. Also like robotic process automation, data science applications, set up a data science unit. Just as the world of transportation, you all know, is moving more and more into a world of data and analytics and artificial intelligence, all coming at us. We were trying to get ahead on that, so I worked on that. So first, I did want to recognize, I talked earlier with Ginger. This format is fantastic. The fact that Texas has set up a group like this to gain input from people in all different industries and government and so forth, I think is really, really a step ahead of most places. My life, we did some of that at VDOT, but it was an ad hoc. We would have a subject, we would do it, and then it would go away. So I just want to recognize what Texas as a state is doing here. I think it's really, really good government, what's happening here. I'm going to talk a bit about the autonomous vehicle, and I'm somebody that obviously have followed that quite a bit for a while, and I'd like to think I speak to some degree from a Texas DOT perspective or a DOT generically perspective. And the thing that I would want to start with is to say, like, I'm a huge supporter of the technology. When you look at what's happening today in safety and all these driver assist technologies that are being added to all the vehicles, if not for the drive towards autonomy, we might not have those things. And they're making tremendous impacts on the safety that we see today. I can't tell you how many potential crashes I might have avoided where I wasn't quite paying attention enough, but my car put the brakes on or something like that. Those are things that are happening everywhere. And it's all because of this. So while everybody points to that ultimate autonomous vehicle, we'll get there. But there's so much good stuff happening now. I don't want people to lose sight of all the good things that are happening at these lower levels of autonomy and the good things that come with that. I also don't want to miss the fact that, you know, over 42,000 people died across the country. And one of the concerns I have with all of the work with autonomous vehicles is that we might we might strive for perfection so much that we miss opportunities to really do some good things. You think back to 2018 with the unfortunate pedestrian fatality in Phoenix with Uber. You know, it kind of went into a 737 MAX type investigation, NTSB. That same day, how many people were killed across the country? I get why it did that. My point being, when something bad happens in this field, it can really put the brakes on what good things could be happening as well. So it's a tough situation to try to moderate that and make sure you're advancing. But if we want perfection, we may never get all of the really. Say you could do something today that went from 42,000 to 10,000. 10,000 would be horrible, but would those 10,000 be enough political pressure to stop the good things that could happen that could prevent the 32,000 avoided fatalities that might have happened with implementing some of this technology? I would say that there are definitely some challenges. You know, we have to educate people. I mean, I think that the number one thing we could be doing is educating people around the benefits that we are seeing and where the technology is today, and just start to grow people's mindset around it's good to implement some of these technologies. I think that there has been a tremendous market hype around some of these things, and I think the Gartner curve is a good way to put it. I think you're at different places on that curve depending on the technology you're talking about. If you're talking about, I'm going to get a car that shows up at my house that I get in that doesn't have a steering wheel and a brake pedal, we have a long way to go. If you're talking about trucks and truck platooning with maybe a driver in the front truck and a following vehicle, very well developed military technology for truck following, you know, we're farther along. Or when you talk about, you know, the Uber and Lyft and people like that type model where you are sharing a vehicle and you can afford to outfit that vehicle with tremendous amount of technology at a much greater cost because it's running, say, 20 hours a day and having all that kind of use. I think you're farther along on that. So I think it varies to the point of where we are in that curve. And then I would say there's some general trends. There's some general trend.
Sorry, Rob. Rob, that's a great point. Excellent.
Okay, yeah.
Speaking of technology.
So you got a microphone. There you go.
Not working? Okay. So I did want to say a couple of the trends that Deloitte is seeing. We've looked at like who are some of the most trusted to access the data from all these vehicles and so forth. And interestingly, between the US and Europe, it kind of mirrored that what people trust is very, very consistent. They do trust the car manufacturers with that data. They trust their vehicle dealer for like maintenance issues and knowing what's happening, what the current status of their car is and so forth. They trust insurance companies with that data. Where they don't trust, there's a whole slew of others in between. Areas that they don't trust, cloud service providers, finance providers, media. So we had a list of, I don't know, 20. Those were the bottom three. Another interesting thing in Europe and the United States, about half of the people are interested in the concept of making a monthly payment for their vehicle all in, meaning a subscription type model where your insurance, your fuel, all of it is there. You pay that. And it's interesting that people are that Europe and US both are very consistently seeing that half of the consumers say that's something they would be interested in finding out more about. People may also be willing to give up car ownership is another thing that we're seeing. We see that in Europe, about 16%, and in the US, about 13%. By 2035 might be willing to do that. That's different than where we are today. If you ask people today, I'm not going to give up my car necessarily. And in the US, 1/4 of people would prefer a car subscription if something like that was offered, where you get the convenience, you get the transparency and all the fees because it's just that fee covers everything, and it's a chance to try new vehicles. You have that subscription, doesn't mean you have that car sitting there. That car may come to you and you have different opportunities, or it might be a monthly subscription where you can trade vehicles and so forth. But I think some of those trends could affect actually how autonomous vehicles and some of those things come into being, where you don't have to necessarily, I don't have to buy a cruise ship to go on a cruise, right? I can just subscribe to it for a week and go on a cruise. So I've got a bunch of other stuff, but I know you've got other things you want to cover. I'll leave it to some questions.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Roger. We need to move this down as they talk. Okay. All right,
I can be loud too.
okay.
Thanks everybody for being here today. This is an exciting conversation to have, I think, especially in Texas. My name is Carter Stern. I'm Director of Global Government Affairs at Cruise. We are an all-electric AV company. Prior to joining Cruise, there's sort of been a thread running through my career, which I began as a trial attorney in Houston, representing road builders that were involved in catastrophic accidents. I then quickly decided that being a lawyer was not for me, as probably some people here had experienced themselves, and got into tech and mobility. Started off with bike share, moved to scooters, then worked for Lyft for a while doing ride hail, and I've been at Cruise for 2 years. And I think that when it comes to where we are on the hype scale, where Cruise is as a company is instructive. So we've seen this consolidation in the last couple of years, Ford shuttering Argo, some other companies shutting down or trimming their sales a little bit. And I actually view that as encouraging. I think that there was a lot of money pouring into the market. Some of the companies were well run and had the right technology, and some of them didn't. That is capitalism. That's a good thing for us to see. Right now, for Cruise, we're in Austin, you can go into downtown Austin right now, tonight, starting at 9 p.m. and ride a Cruise around the Capitol, up towards campus and around downtown. So the technology is on the streets and it's real. Same is true in San Francisco. We've been operating for over a year, operating a driverless ride hail program, fully open to the public, running all evening. And then in Arizona, we also have a delivery program that's been running for nearly 2 years. We're delivering out of 8 different Walmart stores in the greater Phoenix area. So Cruise AVs are on the road in 2 states right now. We're working with the government of Dubai, hence the global in my title, on being their exclusive provider of autonomous ride hail. We've begun some pre-launch activities there earlier last year. And we're also working with the government of Japan. Honda's another one of our investors, and they're looking as their population ages, and of course, as they have a robust public transportation infrastructure and how they feed people into that system. So there's a lot going on. We get a lot of inbound from all sorts of countries and states about how they can set up the regulatory environments. So kudos to Texas. Y'all done an extraordinary job when they ask who we should look to. Texas is often the name that I give them because this is a very friendly place for us to come and begin operating. When it comes to the hype cycle, I think there's a noteworthy Texan who may own Twitter, who I think has done a lot to inflate our expectations about where AV should be, and some of the challenges that company has faced have caused us to shift our perception of AVs. AVs are here, they're on public roads, and we've traveled 4 million miles fully driverless, about a little over 1.5 million as of yesterday, fully driverless. So there's a lot of AVs out driving around public roads. And when we think about some of the challenges, Cruise is often in the news. We've blocked a bus in San Francisco or stopped at an intersection somewhere. And those things are not good. It's not how the vehicle is supposed to behave, obviously. But when you look at that in the context of the broader context of how many vehicles are on the road and the challenges they create, the challenges that normal drivers experience, that is infinitesimal. And so when we think about safety and the opportunity for safety, and I wish I had gone first because I love your example, which 42,000 people dying on Texas roads every year. That is an enormous number. And 10,000 people dying at the hands of an AV is terrible and is not to be made light of. But if we can reduce that number by 50%, 75%, that's an extraordinary benefit to all of us as road users. I know we all think that we are fantastic drivers. We are not, including myself. And so we're going to continue to see ourselves climb out of that hype cycle. One of our biggest challenges, candidly, is not the performance of the AV. It's actually access to charging infrastructure. So there's some challenges on the EV side as well that we're going to have to confront. But as Cruise, without revealing too much, there are plans for this year to expand both in Austin as well as other markets in Texas and beyond, as we're going to continue to see that growth. But I think Texas has done a remarkable job, as it often does, in welcoming new technology, of being friendly to new technology, to holding our feet to the fire when it needs to be, and asking hard questions when those questions need to be asked, but allowing us to realize those benefits of AV. And so this is home for me already, but I think this would be a great home for AV and for Cruise in particular. So.
Just to clarify, the 42,000 is not just Texas.
Yeah.
I want to make sure. That's national.
Got it.
All right, good.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all again. My name is Mark Solano. I think I was here last month with a similar presentation. And I think I saw these folks also last month in Houston for the innovation team there. I handle the community engagement and also policy engagement for Miro here in Houston area and also just in Texas. And so what does that mean? It is my job to work with agencies, municipalities, law enforcement, and educate them on kind of the work that we're doing, not only when it comes to autonomy and the safety aspects of autonomy, but also when it comes to what our system does and what our specific use case was. Jeremiah, not here today, but kind of had different routes in what we work on. He does long logistics and freights. I do kind of last mile, and Carter, not to speak for you, but Carter does passenger and ride-hailing services. So Neuro, quick background, founded in 2016 by two guys that came out of Google who were working on the Google X project, which was their autonomous vehicle. They realized that they could do a little bit better, a little smarter, and kind of make a use case. And so they created Neuro. We've been operating since 2016 all across the country, California, Arizona, Texas, with some folks also in DC. We are fully electric, fully on road. We are not the small bots you see at different universities. We are on road with the rest of traffic. The great thing is, though, when it comes to being on road, is that we have no people in our vehicle. And I've had to tell Mayor Turner of Houston a couple of times that I'm not opening up this machine to show that there's no one inside driving the vehicle. Fully on road, fully electric, zero emissions, really proud of that. We have delivery partners with 7-Eleven, FedEx, Uber Eats as of recently, Domino's. I think we did the Domino's commercial a couple of years ago, and so everyone thinks that not only just do Domino's, but also bake the pizza while it's going to you. While that is awesome and cool tech, we're not there yet. I want to see the hype cycle for autonomous vehicles that do pizzas. And also what I'm most proud of is our recent upskilling initiative that Erica Kemp, I'm not sure if she's in the room, but she attended and spoke on behalf of TxDOT there. We have partnered with Sanderson College in the Houston area. They are very historic college when it comes to workforce development to create the state's first autonomous vehicle the first autonomous vehicle tech certificate. So what that means is that a student within 1 year can go to San Jack, learn coding, learn Python, learn autonomy. They learn computer systems, computer science, and the other set of courses are in the garage at the college. So they're learning vehicle tech. Imagine this high school automotive tech all over again. Additionally, they'll be working in our garage, hands-on learning, where we'll compensate them for their time. So we're really proud of that program. With recent STEER report came out that said between 2025 and 35, in that 10-year gap, there'll be roughly 3.4 million jobs created within autonomous vehicles and EV. So it's 3.4 million jobs within AV or EV. And as perspective, there are currently 3.2 million public school teachers in the US right now. So this is going to be that next big boom in this field. We want to get ahead of it. And so this program is not just for Neuro, but it's for all companies in AV that are moving to Texas and moving to the Houston area that want to partake in it. But we do some really great things at Neuro. Last thing on the hype cycle, I don't really blame Elon Musk. I think I'd blame the Jetsons on like what technology is supposed to look like by now. But we're just really excited to continue our work here in Texas and also where else we operate.
Great. So I want to direct a couple of questions to you guys with your products. So you're out there, you have deployed, you're operating right now. What is your timeline for what, maybe it's the plateau of productivity and really mainstreaming and scaling?
Well, I think it depends what we mean by scale, right? So right now, anyone who's a member of the public in Austin or San Francisco can ride in one of our vehicles. So in that respect, it is a public-facing product. When it comes to scaling the vehicle size, so it fully serves the entire city of Austin and its suburbs, that is a little bit gated by the electrification piece, as well as this year. So far throughout Cruise's history, we've grown by GM. We've been using a GM vehicle that has all these driver controls in it. Looking forward, that vehicle is going to be shuttered, and we'll launch a vehicle called the Origin, which has no steering wheel, no brake pedal, but there's some federal approvals that are required for us to get that vehicle on the road. So that is also a bit of a gate on our ability to scale, because the Chevy Bolt that we've been using is a great vehicle to learn to begin launching commercial services. But fundamentally, it's a vehicle designed around a human driver, which is not the purpose of autonomy, you know? And so I think we'll start to see scale heading at the end of this year, next year, new markets begin to be added. We had the luxury of time in San Francisco and Arizona. We were there from end of 2016 till today. We launched in Austin in 90 days, as that was our first opportunity to work that muscle of moving quickly to enter a new market. And we'll continue to add vehicles incrementally and then exponentially over the course of the next year or two and beyond.
And do you have safety driving?
No safety driver.
Okay.
So scaling our, and I think we have to look at it holistically, so it depends on the use case. And so at Neuro, we're not moving people, we're moving potatoes or groceries or FedEx or whatever you're delivering. And because of that, we're able to use that time that would have been dedicated to security of the passenger, security of the driver, and then focus those time, talent, and everything else on securing the folks around us. So ensuring that we can see pedestrians, ensuring that we call them agents, but vehicles coming at us, vehicles behind us, people on the sidewalk. Our vehicle is a little thinner than a regular car. It's 3.5 feet wide. So because of that, we're able to make tighter turns or just wider turns. So if people are stepping into the sidewalk, we can avoid them as well. But on the overall scale side, so how we deploy and everywhere we operate, we first have a round of Priuses. So it's our Prius fleet. That's the only vehicle in our entire hardware stack that is retrofitted. So we buy these Priuses, we put on our software, we put on our hardware. We use those vehicles to kind of map out where we are, to understand where we are, and to understand the roads. So we've got to measure the stop signs, the yield signs, the potholes, the mini potholes that we experience, and then transition that tech into what our scaled vehicles are, the R2 and R3. And those are the Neuros, we call them the Neuro. And also don't let engineers name things, because we have R2 and now we have R3. And then I think we're just going that way. So that's one thing that I'm trying to talk to them about. But that's how we scale slowly and purposefully. Carter mentioned something earlier about the hype scale where some companies have come back or scaled back. And I same position, I think that's a good thing, because any company in this field, in AV or in this realm, who is attempting to go from whiteboard to asphalt as a sprint, I would not advise or suggest that. This is definitely a marathon. And when it comes to the overall goal of it on our end, and I assume for all AVs, is it's kind of the safety aspect. And so making sure the hardware is there, making sure the software is there, but the last ingredient when it comes to state or the scale or scaling is kind of that public trust component. So do agencies as TxDOT, do lawmakers trust the technology that's there? Because it's not just if something happens on one side of AV, it affects everyone else when it comes to questions about safety. But that public trust level, not just agencies, but also the community you're serving, customers are serving. So they know that they're going to get a dedicated, reliable, safe service, whether it's ride hailing or logistics moving or getting their pizza. So that's kind of the operations we look like when it comes to scaling. But as Carter mentioned, like every regulatory environment, just a little bit different here in Texas. It's a very healthy place. And I think that's why you see a lot of companies moving in, investing their time and talent, and also tracking miles and working on hardware side. But there are just a lot of things that kind of affect the overall. What does scale look like for individual markets?
Do you feel like from the technology perspective, you can overcome some of the limitations that we've seen with the harsh weather conditions?
I think everyone has to work at it. There's no magical flip of the switch and say that now we can do X. We have to first test it and do some work on it. We're fortunate at Neuro that we purchased a retired racetrack in North Las Vegas. We built kind of like a mini city on top of it, so we're able to test in different conditions. When there's snow outside, we send the vehicles out in this closed track and we test out what we can do and kind of scale from there. But we make sure that we run that module, run those test scenarios multiple times before we even think about putting that on the road.
Yeah, no, so starting off in San Francisco, we could not operate in rain at all. It was a big problem. And it wasn't, it was an engineering challenge. And so I think you live in a world of limited resources. There's a lot of money pouring into AV. It is still a field of constrained resources for us. And so as we began to look at other markets where there's a lot of rain, like in Houston, I don't know if you've heard it rains down there quite a bit. We reallocated some of our engineering resources to rain. And I was in a ride 3 weeks ago in San Francisco. It was pouring down rain. Vehicle performed great. And so I think that also goes to the challenge of scale. You know, if we're going to go to snow has historically been a big challenge. And so, you know, thankfully for me, for our engineers, New York does not have a path to deployment. Fine. We have not figured out snow quite yet. And nobody has to the benefit of to the ability to get those on the road. And so I think as we look towards some of those markets that do have snow, we'll reallocate resources to operations in those kinds of conditions. So it's just going to take a long time, but it's not a question of a technical limitation. It's just we haven't put those resources into those capabilities quite yet.
Okay. I saw a quote that I thought was interesting. Because we talk a lot about technology, but the quote was that the business model may be the bigger challenge than the technology. Do you feel you have a solid business model that you know your customers, their willingness to pay, that you're on a path to commercialization that makes sense in the long run?
So we're super specific. Again, we're not competing. There are a lot of companies that are doing autonomous package delivery. You have companies like Starship who exist on campus, so it's very close course. But when it comes to our market scale, we're in a position where there are not a lot of competitors in this realm. And I think that's what the overall idea was when our founders left Google, to say, let's do something that's very use case specific. When it comes to the overall tech and meeting those needs, tech has to meet those needs. And an example of that is we have different partners. So we have Kroger, which is the largest grocer in the United States. Didn't know that. I'm a kid from Texas, so I was like, let's go with the HEB contract, but they wanted to focus on Kroger. So we have Kroger, Carter knows. And then additionally, we also have Uber Eats and a few others. And so every platform that they already exist on internally, we have to figure out a way to tie into that, not just on the business case, but also when our vehicle needs to understand that like we're going this direction, we're going to go to this point because this delivery is, outside of the usual Kroger, zip code or there are lines there. Because even Kroger has like, hey, we want to focus in this area. And so we have to meet those needs. And so we have to match those techs, not just on the autonomy and hardware side, but also just on the business end of making sure that we can calculate that. And one thing we've done so far is one way to get customers in on our end. We did this with Metro in Houston. I'm not sure if Kim Williams is here. We ran the Metro Lift program, which was Metro Lift service repair transit customers. And so instead of them getting on a bus, going to Kroger HEB, bus coming back to pick them up, I think a series of 4 trips, we're able to deliver directly to them. And so the use case there was how do we interact with folks that need a little bit extra assistance, and how we brought them in is by having a zero delivery fee or covering it all together. So that's one way that we're getting customers in for attainment. And then it just depends on the service to keep them, like any business. It just depends on how dependable we are and how our service overall looks like to make sure they keep coming back to us for their needs.
Yeah, I think Lyft and Uber trained folks very well how to use an on-demand ride-hail service. So I think that consumers understand how that service works. When it comes to the AV side, in California, there are some regulatory barriers to just unfettered scale. And so we were required to limit the number of vehicles that are on the road as part of that public fleet. And as a result, we didn't want people to wait 3 hours for an AV when they hailed one. So we kept the number of people that we actually, from the public, we allowed on the platform. But there was a waiting list. And that waiting list after 3 weeks was 43,000 people. So some of those folks obviously just want to go ride around in a vehicle with no one behind the wheel. But I don't know if y'all have, I come from Lyft, so I can, if you've been in a ride-hail vehicle recently, that experience is not as good as it was in 2016. And so I think they're doing us a bit of a favor. You're seeing drivers no longer get on the platform. It's a hard job. It's not necessarily a well-paying job as those companies try to become profitable. Still working on that. And so I think we'll see this natural shift over to AV as it's inexpensive, it's maintained by a centralized operator, and it works extraordinarily.
And I would just say, I mean, back to some of the trends that I talked about earlier, one thing that will drive all this is the average age of vehicles is going up every year. That's, I think, because of better quality vehicles and the price. They're getting very expensive. And so the turnover in fleet, it will be slow. So that will obviously impact how quickly, regardless, I agree with your point. I think technology is tremendously challenging, but I'm less worried about technology than all the other stuff, the legislation, the things that are going to be required for that to operate well. But there are some things that we're seeing that are happening. So 59% of consumers between the age of 18 and 34 question whether they need to own a vehicle. The model of, hey, I'll hail a ride. I don't need to own a car. I can, and when that vehicle is shared against hundreds of users, then you can invest a lot more in that vehicle to spread that out over everybody and make it an economically viable way to go. The other thing that is certainly a big issue with all this is that by 2070, 30% of the population in the world will be over 65. And 7 in 10 people will live in urbanized areas across the globe, which again, I think fits with the model of ride hailing and that kind of thing that I think moves that area up along the height curve farther because it's more doable from a business perspective. And then we also see where some car companies are considering bringing insurance in-house, bringing an insurance capability within their manufacturer within their brand. That, there's obviously liability issues with all this stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in all that. So I just would say that I do think that there are some things that slow it down naturally. I mean, currently, if we have an extended economic downturn, buying a more expensive vehicle will be more challenging for people. The fact that vehicles over the last couple of years have ticked up about 1/10 of a year each year in how long they've been on the road will influence that as well. But there's some larger trends in terms of what people, as was said, how Lyft and Uber have trained people to call a car. I was at a hotel this morning. I hit my phone and I got here. It worked out great. So I think that's a good thing for getting people of a mindset to do it. As I said, I mean, the technology is incredibly complex. There are very challenging things that still have to be solved. But I think less concerned about our ability to solve engineering problems as our ability to solve political problems.
Okay. I want to go back to something you said about the public perception or understanding or of safety, or just, I mean, I think you're relying on some consumer confidence. And where are people at right now, right, in their perceptions? And then what can TxDOT and public agencies do to support the kind of public education of this?
On my end, you mentioned public You have the three, I'm gonna do my best to go each one. Large overview, when it comes to public consumption and where we are now, I think for use cases like cruise and we're at level, autonomy level 3 and 4. I think that's where we're all kind of like setting into this. It's 0 to 5. And again, the Jetsons are like at a 20. So like 0 to 5, cruise and are probably a 3 or 4. Just a use case of Tesla, I think they're at a 2. They're doing their best to approach a 3. And just, I won't get to specifics, I can, but it'll be here for like an hour of like each 20 different variables for each level. I can do that later if you want to. But that's kind of where the scale is. Like you can purchase a vehicle right now, be on the road at level 2. I think some consumers are trying to do their best to approach level 3. When it comes to what TxDOT can do, that's a conversation I'm not quite sure. We have a great environment in Texas. That's just how it is. You're seeing a lot of companies investing and moving in and hiring local, doing upskilling initiatives to ensure that their workforce is local. There's not a place where I want to see any of that technology scale faster. And the reason I say that is because I think a fear for a lot of AV companies is one bad actor of saying that we're at this level and that we can do X, Y, and Z and then not delivering. And so the public trust just kind of drops. And so that is felt all across AV companies, that there are situations that happen across the country, across the globe, where AV vehicle, something will happen and, I'll get an email or a text saying like, not only from an agency, but where are you at with this technology, but also internally, like, what do we have to look out for? So it's a small field, but it's a large field, but very small actions create large ripples. And I think I hopefully answered our questions there.
Yeah, I think TxDOT has done a really good job of being collaborative and being open to AV companies coming to operate. And I think one of the things that frustrates me a little bit about the public narrative around AV is that, they're going to be dangerous. They're going to do all these bad things. Also, haha, you guys, it's 5 years away. It's always going to be 5 years away. And so it's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? We're not going fast enough, but also please don't go too fast. And so I think, just for a little bit of background, before we put an AV, fully autonomous AV on the road, there's 90 to 120 days of work that goes into launching just those AVs. And then we get them on the road, we expand the service area, we expand the capabilities. And so it's a very incremental process. And so I think by allowing us to go out and be responsible actors and holding us accountable, but doing so in a spirit of collaboration, we get these vehicles first, it's 10, then it's 50, then it's 100, then it's 300. And that gradual build in fleet counts is a natural way to build confidence, consumer confidence, because you see them, you cross a road with your child and you think, I've never seen this before, this is sort of creeping me out. And then you do it and you do it again. And it's very much like that first time you got in a TNC and thought, I'm getting in a vehicle with a stranger. I'm not giving them cash. This feels so weird to me. And then you do it 3 times and you never think about it again. You're doing it every morning when you're on the road for work. And so I think there's a natural process that will occur. And I also think, when we've had challenges in Texas or elsewhere, I'll call into TxDOT or I'll call into, elected officials here in Texas and just talk through it. And I think having that opportunity to talk through some of those operational challenges, which anybody tells you, challenges they're like, or I would love to talk to them because they figured out how to do everything perfectly. But I think when you open up markets and allow consumers to get familiar, like consumers are remarkably responsive to new types of technology, new types of services and business models. They'll figure it out. And if we're doing our job, they'll be comfortable with it. But it's going to take that collaboration with government. And so I think that open environment has done it, and it's been an extraordinary head start, I think, for Texas when it comes to it.
And I would just say that at this stage, I think it's really important to have that open environment to let people try things and do it in a safe way, obviously. But, if I were offering advice to any DOT around this, I would say good pavements, good markings, good signage. That's what the vehicles need. I don't think there are many vehicle manufacturers out there sort of saying, well, we're going to depend on whatever the number is, the 2,000 departments of transportation across the United States of America, the 50 states, every city, every county that's got me. It's just, that's a tough thing to count on to get them all aligned on something. But I do think that there's another piece of it that ties with this, but more on the connected vehicle side, that I think that Texas is doing the right thing and a lot of other states are doing the right thing. And that's really on the connected vehicle side and the data, and really offering things that can improve efficiency of the network. There's a pilot going on right now that I'm aware of where the vehicles are connected with signals and they're getting alerts when the signal's going to change or ending up with less lost time at the signal because, hey, the light's going to turn green, get ready. Things like that. I think I have a car that never had this before, but car in front of me leaves, it dings at me. Hey, the person in front of you moved off, so you can start, and it's probably saved me several seconds in multiple occasions because I wasn't sitting there. I just think that connected vehicle technology and how you use the data from all of these vehicles is really going to be valuable to the state DOTs because there's huge big data issues there. There's big analytics problems there. There's an ability to deploy artificial intelligence on that. There's a huge area of data and making the data useful for safety, for better operations on the network that are somewhat untapped right now that will really be an opportunity.
Well, let's stay on that thread and let me ask the other two down here about data sharing opportunities. What data can TxDOT share as well as what data can they ingest that would help improve your operations?
So on the data sharing side, one of the things we're working with cities on is around closures. Because those are unanticipated road features. So if it's shutting down Toyota Center in Houston, if there's a Ariana Grande concert, why that's why, but Taylor Swift, yeah, that'd be better. If there's road closures, unexpected road closures, if there's flooding, any kind of reporting they can give us on unusual road conditions, that helps a lot. On the company side, like unsurprisingly, I think there are some concerns that we have about sharing proprietary data around trip distances, ridership, those kinds of things. We do share in certain jurisdictions. There's some safety information we'll share around collisions. I think that's reasonable. We'll also we will share data in response to lawful process if there's been some kind of criminal activity near one of our vehicles. Obviously, there are some concerns about these vehicles are driving around all the time, collecting a lot of image data, and we don't want to be deputized necessarily by the state to provide that data, just unfettered. I think that's a really good opportunity. And one of the things that we've talked about, but as of now, this is purely in the talking stages, we have a lot of data about street conditions. And so is there an opportunity to help cities with, are we seeing potholes in an area? Is there a tree down in front of the road? Are there unsafe road conditions that we can then, or if it's a curb busted, those types of things, the nuts and bolts of maintaining that infrastructure that we can provide to the TxDOTs, the cities, to make sure they can be more targeted in their use of limited resources as well. That's purely in the ideation phase right now, but I do see a world in the future where that's either part of a regulatory framework or it's a different product line for these AV companies.
Just to go on that, what Carter mentioned, two cases that we've done in Houston. So we focus hyper local, sorry. And you're right, there are like 2,000 departments, so there's a lot. We've worked with Harris County, the city of Houston, Westview, and other municipalities where we operate. And two examples are our Prius fleet. We focus on what's ahead of us and what's behind us. We're not trying to, but we see them rolled around us. Just imagine you sitting in your passenger seat. Whatever you see, we also see with our LiDAR and short range and long range. We noticed that within 6 weeks, there were 3 crashes, our vehicles, just other people on the road at a single stoplight in the Galton area. And so we assessed it and we saw there were many variables that went into why that was happening. There was a stoplight that it was positioned weird. It was all on merging. It was merging lane. There was just a lot of variables where if it was your first time there, you would slow down and go like, what do you do here? So we saw that and we raised it to the city of Houston through our internal Safe Streets initiative. Raised it to the city of Houston, said, look, this is what we've seen. We're happy to turn over some of the footage if y'all are interested in that. Made it through the process, and I'll give it to the credit of Director Ronica Davis over at the city of Houston. She took it seriously. And so I think last time I checked in last month, they were doing a traffic study on what is going on at this one intersection. The other item that we worked with, also city of Houston in this case as well, is that there's in Houston off Waugh and West Dallas, there's a Whole Foods. I look at Carter because I think we live near each other. There's a roundabout and then you exit onto West Dallas. Well, there's not a stop sign there, and people that take the roundabout go pretty quickly and they use it as kind of a charge station, just sling the shot onto West Dallas. And so we're realizing when our Prius went through it, our vehicle was, I believe, attempting to say like, hey, there was a stop sign here, now there's not. Vehicles coming this way, it's not safe for us to go. So our vehicle was kind of telling our driver, like, be aware of the conditions. And so our AVO, our autonomous vehicle operator, they can note these things down. They have an instrument in the vehicle where they can voice record like what they see live. And so we're seeing there just tons and tons of traffic just zooming by when we have the right of way. And so they brought it to our Safe Streets initiative that I managed. I looked into the case, and lo and behold, I didn't know any of the details of where it was, but it was exactly on the city of Houston's high injury network. And it was also exactly where I got clipped on my bike 2 years prior at that exact intersection. So I took this as a point of pride and said, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to drop my entire calendar this week, and this is going to be my sole focus. So after 3 months of going back and forth with the city of Houston with the property owner, because they sold it off in the 80s and they repurchased it. So I had to find like who owned it through like Harris County tax appraisal, like how to find out who owned it. We finally got a stop sign there. So I like to think that that intersection is now just a little bit safer. But we have the ability, I think we have the ability, I say think now. We know where the potholes are, we know the missing stop signs are, because our vehicle is recognized and taught and trained to say like, hey, let's stop here. But when our AVO says, you know, why are you stopping here? The stop sign's on the ground. We can ping that to the appropriate authorities.
All right. I think at this point, I want to see if the task force members have any questions. Michael?
An observation, when the automatic elevator was invented, humans didn't go on the automatic elevator. Humans had to hit the button. And after, you know, some months, humans said, you know what, this automatic elevator is pretty cool. When's the last time you saw humans hitting the buttons for other humans on automatic elevators? The point is the transition of technology for the human is very repeatable. And, you know, the history tells us that. Rob, I'm going to try to be funny for a minute. I think your car is training you to be a distracted driver.
I think there's a tremendous amount of distraction.
You have the ability to have adaptive cruise control, and your car brakes for you. You mentioned that earlier. And now you have a technology that tells you when the car in front of you moves. So you're probably checking your stops and other things as part of that process. The part I want to bring up is the safety thing. I think, Rob, you hit a home run on the safety part. I also sit on the TxDOT safety task force. During COVID, fatalities went through the roof. They were going down, they went up. I think we're turning into two different drivers. Both of the drivers are bad drivers. One is a very aggressive driver that has maybe some mental health elements related to COVID. You see people driving down the shoulder of freeways, you see drag racing on the freeway, you see weave movements. You didn't see that to that extent previous to COVID. The technology of the vehicle isn't going to fix those situations. And then I think those of us who develop safety countermeasures, we're doing a horrible job helping the technology companies where we don't say, you know what, it's unfortunate we don't have aggressive technology in place yet. We have more fatalities today. We've got to get our technology companies or support our technology companies more. Those of us in safety that do countermeasures, we don't look at technology in the future. We're looking at how to fix this particular problem today. And I think we got to train safety people, more technology elements to increase in the public message. You know, it's unfortunate we don't have our technology with us today. So we're going to have to develop, you know, greater resistant pavement at this intersection or something. I think those of us on the safety side need to create a glide slope for the technology platform because the technology is going to be so far superior to us as humans driving, especially the aggressive driver. Can you put up the hype cycle? This is my last thought here. And it gets back at your question you asked with regard to what role TxDOT, and I'll make it more broadly. What role can the public sector play? And I'll make it more broadly. What role can the 2,000 governments play? We would love to be a partner with you with regard to public and private sector risk with regard to this particular cycle. So for example, Aurora's not here. There's a concerted effort across this state to locate all the construction sites daily, automate that in an information system, potentially visualize that, upload it. So long distance truck companies have the benefit of adjustments in construction sites. So when you say, well, we need better markings and better pavements, well, we in government can't do that across every single piece of pavement. You couldn't do that in Virginia across all your pavement. So there has to be more partnership in this. You know, where can we provide better markings and pavements, better construction zones? Where can government absorb the risk on some of these particular elements? I think TxDOT did a great job back in 2017 absorbing the risk by welcoming autonomous companies to the state without passing on a whole bunch of liability as part of that. It was a major breakthrough for our state. I remember when this task force was formed, I don't know, 15 years ago. Christy, I think you were in second grade. We wanted to be better than Michigan. We were jealous of Michigan. How do we create a marketplace where technology companies wish to come to Texas? And I think this task force has helped create that environment. But my point is, I think we need to do more. I think it needs to be more selective, more strategic. There's no reason why conversations can't occur. So if you're spending a lot of time with technology around the Capitol in the University of Texas, you know, maybe that's where pavements and markings are focused on in order to help advance that particular technology, for example. But I think on the safety side, we've got to do a better job saying, gee, it's unfortunate. We're going to go in and do whatever countermeasures we can, but you know, we got to get technology here faster. Because the first fatality that occurs due to autonomous vehicle, I'm going to be the person that stands up and says, you know what? This has at least has saved us 20% fewer fatalities because we're stupid when it comes to driving. I'm really worried about these ghost cars with paper plates, cars that don't get inspected, often are salvage titled, don't have insurance, have somewhat of a criminal background, driving crazy. We're pulling now the license plates of fatalities to see if there's a greater preponderance of fatalities associated with ghost cars and paper plates. But we got to start thinking of these technologies. Those of us not in the technology business, those of us in the public sector, how do we create a glide slope for the technology companies as part of public discourse? I think that's an important component. May not be to this task force. I think that's an important component to us in the public sector.
I did want to say one thing relative to the distracted piece. I completely agree. And, you know, one of the things that I think we all need to be very cognizant of is we're getting into the most difficult part. And that is when you get to these higher levels of autonomy, now you have people who have a responsibility to take over that are completely disengaged. And then all of a sudden the car says, hey, take over. There's a problem. And they might be so disengaged, they got to figure out, okay, I got to take over it. And then figure out, what did my taking over cause? What's the issue? And there's been some research that perception reaction time is humongous compared to what we normally expect in driving. So that gap between 5 and where we are today will be it's a big chasm.
You have to leave 4 minutes for the person to come from the back seat back into.
Yeah. Well, that's why they should be thought of completely differently, right? And I think I was driving a Tesla the other day and it was the exact same thing. I put it on, I'm paying attention because I was curious to test it. But, you know, it doesn't work that well. It works pretty well for what it's intended to do, but it is not autonomous. And so your vehicles are level 4, which means they can drive fully autonomously within a bounded area. And there's no expectation that I take over. But if drivers are already really bad at paying attention, and then you say, hey, don't pay attention for 3 minutes, but like check in every once in a while. That is a wild proposition to make. The driver's actually going to pay attention. So I think at first I thought maybe level 2, level 3, like, oh, this is a great gateway drug to full autonomy because people get so comfortable with it. And now I think it actively sets us back because most of the bad news articles you read is someone who's using a vehicle as a fully autonomous vehicle when it is not a fully autonomous vehicle, but the two get conflated.
But your point about that partnership, I think is absolutely right. Where you target, resources are limited. So is there a place where you can target those resources that work cooperatively with the people who are doing that work? Makes a lot of sense.
Now, we've got a few questions from online, and then Darren, I also wanted to see.
That's like
I don't know, Kurt, that sounds good.
I have a couple questions. Carter, you just answered that. I wrote down earlier whether both of your systems were operating in geo-fenced areas. Right. So, and I think that's an important piece for the education that we don't have this notion that they can go anywhere. No, they're in a specific defined area where they know all of the ODDs of what's happening. And you said, yeah, use your Prius to do all the mapping. And I think that's really, really important. I think the public education piece is amazing. And we have a lot to do across the board. You mentioned distracted driving, and as that last conversation you were talking about, I think about the videos that we've seen of people asleep, like on a California highway. There was one young lady that was completely asleep. People are blowing the horn trying to get her to wake up as she's driving that Tesla. And I remember being at one of the OEM's labs probably 10 years ago, and I was with Secretary LaHood. And they were talking about, he had a big focus on distracted driving. And they put him in this simulator and they gave him all these distractions. And he said, he asked them about, well, what about full autonomy or, just taking over? And researchers said, you have to keep them engaged. It doesn't take too much before they lose interest and they fall asleep. Well, he said, if you're just sitting there and there's nothing to look at, your mind just kind of goes to some other place. Then you got to get back together. There was a movie that I think illustrates that exactly, that says, hey, do whatever you want. But then the car says, hey, I'm in trouble here. And it was iRobot. So forget the Jetsons, iRobot did, right? When the car really needed the driver to drive because there was, robots jumping all over it, he had to wake up and the steering wheel pumped up. So it's a lot of the film industry was ahead of us. I want to leave one last point. A lot of this discussion was about safety, and Rob, I agree completely with that discussion of the Uber crash. In fact, I was interviewed the day after that crash by a reporter and said, well, what do you think about this? And I said, well, what about the other 99 that crashed yesterday? And the reporter didn't want to talk about that. I said, but why are we not talking about the other 99 lives that are lost? And I think we have to go back to that. How many people die every single day? Now, that's got to be the message. And you can put it in the context of, yeah, okay, it was one. Sorry for them, but what about the other 99? And if we could save half of them, and that gets to my last point, and Darren will know this, there's a big initiative within AASHTO this year on the safety focus. There's going to be a big safety summit in October. And related to that is a big national vision project that I've been working on. And one of the moonshots is related to safety. It says, well, what if we could reduce that number in half? Nobody's saying get rid of vision zero, because that's what the goal should be. But what if in the next 10 years we could get that number to what it was post World War II, or cut it by 10,000? Look, we still are going to kill 25,000, but we saved a bunch. So there's going to be a lot of discussion in the next year and a half about, okay, what would it take to do that? How could we put all of our resources, industry, emergency response, government, towards reducing traffic fatalities? So I think your message, all three of your messages, right on, and we got to continue to push that.
Well, that's perfect in the way of really, really good.
Right.
You get questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, you had several that come in.
I'm curious, we're talking about the realities of technology advancements still need to occur. But if you had to cast a vision for 10 or 15 years down the road, in the context of the relationships in this room between you as technology deployers and public agency transportation departments, like what would you want to see in 10 or 15 years from now? Or whenever the hype curve gets there, the plateau is realized at a large market scale, What vision would you cast? What do you want your relationship look like with the Department of Transportation, and what technologies or services or barriers do you want to see in place? What barriers do you want to come down?
I think TxDOT does a really good job of building infrastructure. And so I think from our perspective, we have this amazing environment to operate in. So like to continue doing that. I used to represent a lot of road builders. 99.9% of them did a really good job. So TxDOT did a good job of retaining those folks. Beyond that, I think, so right now, our vehicles are not connected. And most, Google's, a lot of these vehicles are not connected to public infrastructure. And those are for cybersecurity concerns. However, at some point that will shift. And there'll be a lot better of a two-way street when it comes to sharing data. I think different companies and different use cases are going to feel differently when it comes to what to share, when to share, and how that's shared. But I see a world where, there's a lot of talk when it comes to sort of the urbanist policy wonky types about the moral hazard of full AV. And this, are we going to commute 3 hours every day and all these emissions and all this wear and tear on roads? Like, that's not a good thing. And there's a kernel of truth in there. But I think that if we can communicate pretty seamlessly with DOTs when it comes to road closures, weather conditions, things that we've seen in the roadway where we think there may be an unsafe situation, that it's hard for one contractor or one administrator to drive by and discern. But if we're driving by 1 million times a month, we can pick up pretty quickly. I think there's a really great opportunity to create a feedback loop where we have the information we need to operate as safely as possible, bolster our safety case, and that the public sector, government has an opportunity to really be strategic in how they just deploy what even TxDOT is a huge agency with a lot of resources doing a really good job, but you could always be more strategic, you could always be more surgical. And I think access to that data will go a long way towards helping them do that. And that to me, I think is the real ideal state of play. I don't think it's horribly complex, but it's a combination of us reaching scale and also all of us figuring out how we do that communication, that data sharing.
Just real quick on my end, I'm trying to think of what that agenda will look like in 15, 20 years. So it's either going to be Dr. Chen or Mark I'm meeting with, they're running TxDOT in 15, 20 years. One of them, take your bets. I think on that agenda, it might look like when Carter mentioned earlier, the gates, like we have similar gates and that's charging infrastructure. So where are those located? I know TxDOT's doing a great job of planning that out right now and going into execution, but how does that look like for AV? So vehicles that have no driver approaching the dock, charging itself for X amount of time. We rent that, wattage from whomever and it takes off. I think that's the first thing on the agenda. Second thing is probably curb management, something that we're looking into more and more now. And that's with our delivery vehicle. So you have to look at it like Uber Eats or Shipt, or when you're being dropped off, there's double parking hazards. The Uber driver taking you to your destination doesn't find a parking spot. They say, hey, I'm going to drop you at this corner. You can run the rest of the way to get ready to go. I think that's also the other item that I think AV development needs to look at. So are there going to be sections of the road that are just AV only? Or is this, from Congress Street down or Congress to Red River, is that one strip on 7th Street going to be only AV? And I think the last thing, and what I just mentioned, is AV roads specifically. So just vehicles that are AV or EV having their own lane, not HOV lanes, but I know Aurora, they would probably love just 18-wheelers only on this lane, and then 18-wheelers only in this lane that are AV, so they connect with each other. I think those are probably the top 3 things that should be or could be assessed in about 15 years' time, because it's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue.
And then we've had a few questions come in from online. One of them is around charging infrastructure. So Carter, you had brought that up, and a lot of AVs are going to be EVs. So if you could speak to a little bit about what you would like to see in terms of supporting and building out the charging infrastructure network, in addition to maybe there's a data sharing component.
Yeah, I think on the incentive side, if you can afford a $125,000 Tesla, or I don't mean to pick on Tesla, but they're ahead, right? If you can afford a really expensive EV, I'm not sure you need an incentive for your home charger. So I think making those incentives available to fleet operators is going to be a big shift. I know there's a lot of federal dollars trickling down right now. A lot of those dollars are focused on corridors, like highway corridors, which, not to speak for Jeremiah, but might be good for a company like Aurora when they do some electrification work, but is less applicable to some of these smaller delivery services or ride-hail services that are happening within a central business district or in neighborhoods. Also, it has been our biggest challenge right now is permitting charging infrastructure. And so I don't think it's a secret cities are underfunded. They've seen attrition, and a permit that is not horribly complex now takes 18 months. And that's a huge challenge for us. And that's one for which there is no technical fix. There's no way around it. And then finally, working with utilities, they, looking nationally, they vary in terms of how ready they are. There's a lot of talk in Texas around, we've had a couple of storms that challenged our grid. And I think that there's an ongoing discussion around what we can do to bolster that grid to prepare and the extent to which we want to prepare for the electric future. And so I think those are big structural challenges that, like, as I said, there's no structural fix, and we've got to work with government on getting there. But those are hard breaks that don't care whether or not the AV technology is level 3, level 4, level 5.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm glad you brought up the grid thing, because in our work on EV work in general, that everybody thinks, oh, there's 500,000 new chargers going in, you just go and hook them up and it's all good. But the grid, there are issues. There are big issues, and depends on where you are, and some places are better than others. But and when you talk with the utilities and experts in that area, there's a lot of data, some of the same issues. There's a lot of data, but there's not a real willingness to share all that data, which will be very important to how the grid operates and so forth in the future. So I think this whole thing is not just chargers. It's a larger problem than just the chargers. You got to get it on the grid. I think the point on the AV only express lane or AV lanes only, I think that there are places around the country that are going to be well situated where they already have managed lanes and so forth. They're highly instrumented. You can do that. And then, my hope, sort of going to the future again, is like, if you say 15, maybe 20, but 2040-ish, hopefully we'll be in a point where there's some changes we've got to make because of problems. And what I mean by that is, you think of downtown Austin, if all these AV vehicles are driving around and I know they actually work, do you think I'm waiting for a crosswalk? I'm stepping out. You're gonna create grid.
Yeah, especially you, Rob.
Yeah. If people do trust it, they know it works. They will. Hey, why wait?
I have a friend of mine. She works at Rice. She lives in the Rice Village area. She rides her bike over to, she teaches at Rice. And I was actually, we're having dinner, and the executive director of Bike Houston was like nearby. I think it was an event actually. And she mentioned how she always feels a level of calm when our vehicles go by, because they know that our vehicle is always going to give her the right of way versus other cars in the area. And it pained me, and I was like, I want to put that on a t-shirt of like, the neuro car always respects my space. And then I thought more about it and said, actually, that just might encourage more cyclists to go, the neuro car is going to give me some space and test. That's not a place I want to be in. Yeah. But it's just, you're right. There's a level like normality, and then like testing that is just not a fun test to run.
Yeah. To go back to your question, one of the biggest challenges we have right now as we're growing the fleet is that people know they can mess with our cars, and the car is going to stop and act right. So I have a great video. I wish I brought it, of someone in San Francisco is sort of lawless. And, there's a guy on the street, and he keeps leaping in front of the vehicle to try to get hit. And he doesn't get hit, thank goodness, because he's really doing his best. And we'll have, people will throw bricks at the cars. I've been in a car in the middle of the night with a member of a state agency, and we're chatting. This guy runs up, starts pounding on the windows and doing all this crazy stuff. And one of the challenges we've had is that is a huge challenge for us. It should not be law enforcement's first priority to help us with that. But there is a public a criminal piece to that. And so, like, how do we work together to make sure law enforcement has much bigger things they should be focusing on than making sure nobody interferes with a cruise AV. But it would be nice to figure out how we can leverage some of those resources to make sure it doesn't happen as much. And so far, we don't have a good model for how we do that.
You also have like the most efficient way of getting a headshot and a profile of people messing with the vehicle.
Which they don't seem to realize. There's a lot of pictures of you if you mess with an AV. So.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. Steve Dellenbeck, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? I saw that you had a question about some of the tele operations. And so I think that's something that plays into kind of forward thinking. And then we could have one more question. Darren, you had asked about some of the federal or state legislative items.
Yeah, there's been a variety of discussion about what you do when a vehicle gets stuck. And, the reality is even the best of us programmers aren't going to be able to get every corner case situation, maybe a tight emergency situation or a tight construction. So maybe you could visit a little bit about what's your philosophy towards telecommuting, There's also some standards work being done on how one would do telecommuting coming out of the ISO community. And then the challenge is the person that telecommutes, do they have to be licensed to operate the type of vehicle that they're teleoping? So comments?
Yeah, so the way our teleoperation works, so first, as a threshold matter, we as crews, there's a vehicle out on the road. I don't know where the camera is. I'm trying to look at you. There's no way for us to operate that vehicle remotely. So in other words, there's nobody sitting in a room somewhere they can say, take over, Carter's driving the AV, and re-engage the stack. And the reason for that is if we can do that, then somebody else can. And that other person may not be a good actor. But what we do have is remote assistance. And we talk about remote assistance as a fourth sensor. So that vehicle is driving along within the ODD and comes upon something. It may be a tree, it could be a shadow, it could be a puff of smoke, it could be a child on a bicycle. And it has trouble identifying what it's seeing. The vehicle will stop and say to itself, like, I cannot proceed another inch safely. Let me ping RA. And in the remote assistance terminal, there was someone looking at a bank of computers, a bank of screens that are displaying all the data that vehicle is ingesting at that moment. And while I can't drive that car, what it can do is identify what the vehicle's seeing if it's having trouble labeling an object. And it can also provide a suggestion on which way it should drive. So it may say, that's not a puff of smoke. Carter's just extraordinarily pale because he's been stuck inside all winter. You can allow him to pass and proceed on or route around him. We can also I was in a car early on in downtown San Francisco, 4-lane street, and police pulled over someone in front of the vehicle, and blocked off 3 of the 4 lanes. Sirens are flashing, lights are flashing. There's a lot of activity. All of the traffic is now moving into that one left-hand lane. And I couldn't see what remote assistance was doing, but what I could tell they were doing is suggesting the car route around that barrier. So in other words, it's saying, hey, look, this looks like it's going to be blocked for the foreseeable future. Why don't you drive around in that one left-hand lane? And it can't force the car to do that. It's making a suggestion. So the sensor suite is still engaged. The vehicle is still saying, is there a vehicle behind me? Is there a vehicle next to me? Can I safely merge to my left? But it is helping it make that decision or make that suggestion of where it should go. Right now, we have, I don't want to speak for industry, but like we as crews have no plans for the kind of teleoperation where you were driving the vehicle. There's some issue identified. There's some licensing issues. There's some insurance issues. And, candidly, as we climb out of the trough of disillusion, there's a little bit of, and this goes to public infrastructure as well, there's a little bit of, we should be able to operate within the service area, like full stop. We have to figure that out. Roadways are chaotic, they're varied, but if we're gonna provide L4, L5 services, we need to figure out how to do that. And we shouldn't we should be able to do that on our own. So we're not trying to create a vehicle that someone else can drive remotely at all right now.
Just a quick follow-up. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't have cell coverage? I mean, heaven forbid our cell phones not work, but I know I walk through various urban canyons, et cetera, and I simply have no coverage. So what will the cruise vehicle do? If it encumbers, let's say, a tree across the road, it can't do, since you're not going to teleop, so what happens? I mean, what if the vehicle does you just tell the passengers to get out and go on and have a good day, or what do you do? I'm curious.
It's not the exact script, but no. So what we'll do if that vehicle is driving, and if anything happens with the vehicle, so we talk about remote assistance. That's one example of the vehicle saying, "I'm not sure what to do." What if a rock gets kicked up and hits one of those LiDAR sensors that can no longer operate safely? At that point, if the vehicle determines it cannot drive safely, and that includes loss of cellular connectivity, it will go into what we call a minimal risk condition, which means it'll just pull over to the side of the road. Now, that may mean if the vehicle determines it can pull over safely, great. If it doesn't even feel safe doing that, it will stop in the lane and it will block traffic. And that is a challenge, an operational challenge that we have. But that's a choice that we're making, that we would rather that vehicle not drive another inch unsafely and block traffic than to do something that it should, than to potentially put the public in a uncomfortable situation. It does mean that those passengers, if they're in the vehicle, will have to get out. And that is something we talk about public acceptance of our service. Like that's something we're going to have to solve. If you get in a cruise vehicle, 10 times in a row, and half of those times you've got to get out and call an Uber, call another cruise, you're probably not going to do it again. And so that's absolutely an operational challenge when it comes to public service. But that's currently how that operates.
So the cruise vehicle does the same thing that the human does, just abandons the car and leaves it there.
Not for good.
And then Darren, did you want to close out with the legislative question?
Yeah, but rolling into that, I really, there are a lot of great questions on here and as well as what we've already heard. And I really appreciate the future vision question because I've heard continued maintenance and quality of the infrastructure, potential need just now for looking at where digital infrastructure needs to be expanded. You talked about I appreciate that's one of the few AV companies that has mentioned the idea of connectivity might help in the future. And the data sharing related to that. You mentioned curb management. There is a question on here, and I guess I'm getting to the point is a lot of things you talked about what your future vision are questions that we want to work. So we want to follow up with you, all of you really. And so curb management and other design things that we need to address. And we need to work with our city partners because I know you guys predominantly operate on city roads and not on ours, but it's important to us as well. The EV question was asked. Thank you for, it was a big question. What's the challenge? Is it infrastructure, permitting? And that's something we can start looking at as well as the resilience. Intel operations. It's funny, there's another company talking to us about completely remote driving. I don't know how they think they're going to be able to do it, but they asked us if that fell on our AV law. And I said, well, that doesn't really sound like AV. So we're trying to figure out what that means in TxDOT. My question was higher level, and that is we're seeing federal legislation starting to develop again after several years of not happening. Is there one key issue that you would like to see addressed within a federal bill above all others? I mean, I know there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but is there any specific one? And that's all three of y'all.
Just for Cruise specifically, our biggest issue right now is our ability to put novel vehicle designs on the road. I'm sure it's true of Monroe as well. So just to sort of do I'm just a bill, government 101, cities, we work with cities. It's more around charging infrastructure, how we work with law enforcement, curb management. States are doing, the licensing of that vehicle, insurance requirements, and related issues. And, there's states like Texas that have done a good job of passing that legislation. There are others who have no legislation. There's the sort of everything in between. So it's the laboratory of democracy. We can work through that. Federal level, the biggest challenge that we have is that when we have the origin vehicle doesn't strictly comply with federal motor vehicle safety standards. It doesn't have a steering wheel. It doesn't have a rear view mirror. And there's a path whereby you can go through NHTSA, file what's called an exemption petition, say like, hey, look, the vehicle does not strictly comply. However, it is just as safe, if not more safe, as designed. Can you exempt us from these specific FMVSS requirements? And they can do that. There's no shot clock on the process, so it's it's still an evolving area of the law for them. But there is a process in place. Even if they grant that exemption petition, there's a cap on the number of vehicles you can get on the road. And so it's 2,500 in the first year, 25 in the second year, and that first 25 rolls off in the third year. So you're capped basically 5,000 vehicles. So when we look at American competition with other countries around AV, that's one of our, from my perspective, one of our biggest challenges is just it's 2,500 vehicles at scale is not enough for Austin, much less the rest of the country. And so it's going to limit our ability to get these services on the road.
On my end, so I think there's 20 plus states now that have individual frameworks for what AV should look like regulatory wise. And so there's kind of a piecemeal hodgepodge approach about what it looks like across the board. On the national side, there is movement on what definitions of AV X, Y, and Z look like. As Carter mentioned, Neuro was successful in getting a federal exemption to operate on road without having a steering wheel, without having a push pedal brake, without having windshield wipers. And we actually have little mini windshield wipers on the vehicle now because we just left them there. We thought they were cute. On also like side view mirrors, like we did not need those. So we, it's not protested, but we contested to U.S. government that we don't need these things to be successful, and they agreed. And so there was an exemption provided. And Carter's right, there is a cap. And so that does provide limitations. I think, look, Secretary Pete Buttigieg said something 2 months ago that like the laws of the land right now were based on sci-fi that he was growing up in like the 80s. And so like now we have to figure out what the new laws look like. What I can tell you is that I prefer a federal standard versus individual states.
The right federal standard.
The right federal standard, right. The helpful federal standards versus states saying like you can do this, but not this, but not this, and it just makes things more difficult. So on the TxDOT side, everything's going well in Texas. It's great in Texas. There's a couple bills that we're looking out for that threaten some of that. On the federal side, the wish list there is just a set standard. Like, if you can do this and do that, then you're good to go. I don't know what it looks like. I just volunteered at the Houston Livestock Shrine Rodeo for some of the kids, and like they brought out their steer, and the steer does this, good, points there. Steer does that, good, points. I don't know if that looks like with the Origin or like with other vehicles, but there's a set standard of like score points here, you're good on safety, here's a license.
And Darren, I was just gonna say, I mean, I agree with the standards. I think that part of that, and I know that is something that the federal, that says working, but part of that also needs to be our way of making those standards has to change, because this is a technology driven thing. It's not going back to 1965 and I've got a new bumper, right? I mean, this is so rapidly changing. I think the criteria around that has to be nimble, and that's going to take a little different approach. But I think to be effective, if that just means that it's more frequently reviewed, something so that if you've got a new vehicle, that it's not a 10-year process to get there, but hey, they're going to be back looking at this every 24 months or 12 months or whatever it is. I don't know, but that would help. And then I also think there's a piece around data sharing that's critical for DOT to be able to get the good leverage of all the good information they get for operations and safety. These vehicles have tremendous amounts of data there, which is a whole nother can of worms around who's going to pay to store all that data, because could get quite expensive quite fast. But I do think that there should be some data sharing both ways. I think that similarly, it would be very good for DOTs to be providing to these companies where are the work zones, where is some unusual road closure, whatever it might be, that allow them to operate. But then flip side, there's data from those vehicles could allow the DOT to operate their system more efficiently and safely.
All right, I think we have gone over our time limit. Sorry, Michael. Okay, but it's been a very rich discussion. And it sounds like there's more conversation to be had and more work to be done, both practical and public sector together. But thank you so much, panelists, for being here. Please give them a round of applause.